Welcome back to our Places, People, Purpose podcast. We have been talking about Spain's colonization of Panama, which lasted for roughly 300 years. Today, we're going to explore the transfer of ownership from Spain to Colombia, and then ultimately, Panama's independence. This is a fascinating chapter in Central American history, and I'm thrilled to be able to take you through it. So let's set the stage and dive right in. To understand the transfer of ownership of Panama to Colombia, we must first look back to the pre-colonial era. As we have learned, Panama was a melting pot of indigenous cultures, including the Guna, Embera, and Nobe Bugle, among others. These societies flourished as they adapted to the diverse landscapes from the lush rainforests to the pristine coastline. The indigenous people of Panama had intricate social structures, advanced agricultural practices, and a deep spiritual connection with nature. They traded goods and knowledge across vast regions, creating a dynamic network of societies long before European explorers arrived. In 1513, Vasco Nez de Balboa achieved a significant milestone by crossing the Isthmus of Panama on foot and discovering the Pacific Ocean. As we learned in our earlier podcasts, the discovery of a new route to the Pacific intensified Spain's interest in Panama, leading to further exploration and eventual colonization. The Spanish established settlements and started exploiting the region's abundant resources, including gold and other precious metals, which contributed to the creation of the Camino Real, or Royal Road, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. Throughout the years, Spain accumulated vast overseas territories. In the 18th century, the administration of these colonies underwent significant changes due to a number of reasons. One of the reasons was a series of administrative and economic reforms initiated by the Bourbon monarchs of Spain. It's helpful at this point to know a little more about the Bourbon house, which is not a distillery, but one of the most important ruling dynasties of Europe. In the year 1700, the Spanish King Charles IV died with no heirs. As a result, he became the last Habsburg king of Spain, a line of monarchs going back to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. The French king at the time, Louis XIV, moved to make his grandson Philip the Spanish king, and Philip ascended to the Spanish throne in 1700, marking the beginning of the Bourbon rule in Spain. Philip's reign started the Bourbon line of monarchs in Spain, a line of monarchs that still holds the throne in Spain today, with King Felipe VI as the current reigning monarch. At various times in history, the Bourbon dynasty ruled France, Spain, Naples, Sicily, and Parma. With that helpful bit of background, let's go back to what was happening in Spain during the 18th century. The 18th century saw various challenges to Spanish colonial rule, including rebellions, uprisings, and external threats from other European powers. There was contraband commerce, a loss of control by the Spanish over transatlantic trade, and a failure to modernize the country's finances to fill depleted royal coffers. As a result, the Spanish Empire in the Americas had declined in profitability for many decades before the Bourbons took over. The Bourbon house was determined to change this and make the empire profitable again, so they enacted the Bourbon reforms. The main objective of the Bourbon reforms were to put an end to smuggling, regain Spanish control over transatlantic trade, enhance economic productivity of the colonies, modernize the taxing system, and establish a more centralized control over the many regions of the Spanish Empire. The creation of the viceroyalties was a part of the Bourbon reforms and replaced the former administrative units with more centralized structures of governance. The Viceroyalty of New Granada was established in 1717 and was comprised of territories that included present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. This reorganization marked a shift in the governance of Panama, bringing it under the jurisdiction of the Viceroyalty's capital, Bogotá. As the 19th century approached, the winds of change swept across Latin America. Spain's grip on its colonies began to loosen, and revolutionary movements seeking independence emerged. Simón Bolívar played a pivotal role in the liberation of several South American countries, including Panama, from Spanish colonial rule. Simón Bolívar was born on July 24, 1783, in Caracas, Venezuela, into a wealthy family. He lost both of his parents at an early age and, somewhat ironically, was sent to Spain to receive his education. His time in Europe exposed him to the French Revolution and the concept of liberty, which would profoundly influence him. Bolívar's exposure to the tumultuous events unfolding in Europe, coupled with his own observations of Spanish colonial oppression in South America, ignited a desire for change and independence. Bolívar's primary goal was to free his homeland and the entire continent from Spanish rule, becoming a united, independent Latin America. Bolívar's efforts as a liberator began in earnest in 1810 when he returned to Venezuela from Spain. He joined the revolutionary movement, which was already gaining momentum in various South American territories. In the spring of 1819, Bolívar conceived his master plan of attacking the Viceroyalty of New Granada. His attack on New Granada is considered one of the most daring in military history. He led a small army of about 2,500 men through the plains, but it was the rainy season, so the rivers had become lakes. For 7 days, they marched in water up to their waists, and the men were plagued by parasites and leeches. 10 navigable rivers were crossed, most of them in cowhide boats. The journey through the plains seemed easy, though, in comparison with their ascent of the Andes Mountains that stood between Bolívar and the city of Bogotá. Bolívar has selected the pass at Pisba for the simple reason that the Spanish did not have defenders or scouts there. No one thought an army could possibly cross it. The pass peaks at 13,000 feet, which is almost 4,000 meters. At this elevation, many of the scantily clad troops died of cold and exposure. The fatigue and loss, however, were more than outweighed by the advantage gained in descending virtually unopposed into New Granada. The Spaniards were taken by complete surprise, and in the Battle of Boyacá, on August 7, 1819, the bulk of the Royalist army surrendered to Bolívar. The battle only lasted 2 hours. At least 200 Royalists were killed, and another 1,600 were captured. On the Patriot side, there were only 13 killed and 53 wounded. The battle was a tremendous, one-sided victory for Bolívar, who marched unopposed into Bogotá 3 days later. This was a turning point in the history of northern South America. In December 1819, Bolívar made his appearance before the Congress that had assembled in Angostura, Venezuela, and he was made president and military dictator. He urged the legislators to proclaim the creation of a new state, and 3 days later, the Republic of Colombia, usually called Gran Colombia, was established, comprising the countries of Colombia, Panama, Venezuela, and Ecuador. Since most of that territory was still under royalist control, it was largely a paper achievement, but reflected Bolivar's future plans for Gran Colombia. Early in 1820, a revolution in Spain forced the Spanish king Ferdinand VII to recognize the ideals of liberalism on the home front, an action that discouraged the Spanish forces in South America. Bolivar persuaded Spanish General Murillo to open armistice negotiations, and the two warriors met in a memorable encounter at Santa Ana, Venezuela, signing in November of 1820 a treaty that ended hostilities for a 6-month period. In 1821, the Spanish colonies in South America successfully gained independence, forming the Republic of Gran Colombia, which included present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. However, the union was short-lived, and by 1831, Gran Colombia dissolved into 3 separate countries, including the Republic of New Granada, which included Colombia and Panama. As you can imagine, Simón Bolívar's legacy endures in the hearts of the people he liberated. His vision of a united South America, though not fully realized in his lifetime, left a lasting impact on the continent's history. Bolívar's ideals of liberty, democracy, and social justice continue to inspire generations of leaders and activists across Latin America. Throughout Latin America, numerous statues, memorials, and institutions bear Bolívar's name as a tribute to his contributions to the region's independence and his role as a symbol of freedom. His image is imprinted on currency, streets, and buildings, signifying the enduring admiration and reverence he commands. With respect to Panama, it remained part of Colombia until 1903, when, with the support of the United States, Panama declared its independence from Colombia. This move was triggered by the ongoing construction of the Panama Canal, a vital waterway that the United States was keenly interested in controlling. As we will discover in future podcasts, the Panama Canal project was initiated by the French in the 1880s, but faced numerous obstacles leading to its abandonment. The United States took over the project in 1904 and then became a crucial factor in Panama's quest for independence. We will talk more about the U.S. support of Panama's independence when we cover the exciting history of the Panama Canal. But essentially, the U.S. played a controversial role by supporting Panama's independence from Colombia and securing control over the canal zone. And there you have it, a view into the transfer of ownership of Panama from Spain to Colombia, and later its achievement of independence. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. I hope you found the journey as enlightening as I did. For tomorrow's podcast, we will start looking at many of the fascinating places that make up Panama. So join us tomorrow for our next podcast of Places, People, Purpose, where we create connections to our world.